All right, then we're good to go, I think. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining for this wonderful panel, talking about the battle for attention, looking a bit into UX and discovery details, looking at it from a product perspective, from a content perspective, and I think we have decent different angles, and looking forward to discuss. Briefly to introduce myself, my name is Bernd Riefler. I'm the founder and CEO of Beat Analytics. We're a market intelligence company coming from a product background, and looking at the various products and definitely seeing challenges in the living room. That's what I want to discuss today, together with Rose from Screen Hits TV, with Martin from Media Distillery, Spencer, who joined us from Canada, Chorus Entertainment, and Sylvain from NetGem TV. So we have also a different regional perspective, and I think that's also very important in the topic. So I just give you, like everybody, a couple of seconds, maybe a minute or 90, like the elevator pitch, what your company is doing, because I'm not entirely sure everyone knows, so that everyone has the background of you, and to get started. Rose.
So hi, I'm Rose Holst, and I'm the founder and CEO of Screen Hits TV. Those that are not aware of us, we are basically a SaaS solution to the streaming frustration that's going on out there. And our app lets people put all of their premium streaming services into one app to easily be able to see what's trending across them, what they're watching across all of them. And what's most important is for our partners, for their content to always be seen at the point of discovery by the consumer. So that's Screen Hits.
Hi everyone, my name is Martin Prins. I'm the head of product at Media Distillery. For those that do not know, Media Distillery is an Amsterdam-based startup, and we specialize in using artificial intelligence to understand what video is about, and primarily we're on a mission to improve helping viewers find relevant content faster with an ultimate user experience. And we do this by analyzing the video, detecting what's inside, what are the topics, what's the content about, extracting episodic images out of the content, and even providing like chapter markers so that people can quickly jump to the content of its interest and skip the parts they are not interested in.
Cool. I'm Spencer Charters from Chorus Entertainment in Canada. You probably haven't heard of us, but we're the largest pure play media content company in Canada. So represent about a third of total broadcast viewing. We have great international partners. Dan from Paramount is one of them. We also work with Disney and Discovery and many other US companies to bring their content into Canada. You know, our business, like every broadcast business, has been under huge pressure from consumers around flexibility and choice and price, and from our advertisers to be more targeted, to provide better attribution, and to make it easier to buy advertising. So my team's role at Chorus is to set and implement our digital strategy. We've seen a lot of great growth in the last few years. Our streaming business has doubled in size. The percentage of our revenue that it represents is coming up to 10%. And I think our biggest challenge in this space is identity. We've got our content distributed across so many different partners that getting to something like UX and discovery is difficult when we don't have a persistent view of who our audience is. And our advertisers are asking the very same question. So that's one of the big things that we're working on.
Hi, I'm Sylvain from NetGem. You may know NetGem was created 25 years ago as one of the pioneers of IPTV. In fact, over the years, we rolled out around solutions to more than 10 million homes. In the UK, in the last few years, we've been developing a service, in fact, which includes technology, content, and service together, called NetGem TV, which typically is sold via fiber broadband providers in the UK. There's around 15 fiber ISPs in the UK, as well as TalkTalk, which you may have heard of, who launched recently with us with their TalkTalk 4K TV product. And essentially, our role there is to ensure that we bring the most relevant content to the end user in the simplest possible way. And the core essential values that we try to adhere to are choice, simplicity, and value, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that.
Great, perfect. All right, so we heard a lot about kind of this complexity in the market and the challenges for the consumer. On the other hand, we're seeing kind of increased consumption, therefore maybe the negative connotation is too bad. You could also see kind of this. There are great opportunities in these days. I mean, you have access to a variety of content, different business models, etc. So, what's your experience? Is it rather a challenge and consumers just turn away and eventually read a book, or do they just stick to the stuff that is available and figure out their way actually to solve it and don't see it as a problem itself?
I think that, and what we have seen a lot is that most people, they have one go-to app. And they've been used to doing it. A lot of people love streaming because they love to watch content on demand when it's available. And they usually go to that one app. And they know that there's a lot of content for them out there, but then opening up one icon or another icon or another icon, and then doing a search for that content across multiple different icons, not actually knowing what they're going to find, is very time consuming. And people have a very short window to say, okay, I want to watch something tonight, I want to watch an action show. They go to their go-to app, and they actually have seen everything on that app. But then the thought of having to actually open up another icon and guess, well, what's in here? Am I going to find something? And then they don't. That's when they turn to a book or they turn to gardening. So, we really found that when people are able to just kind of search across everything and have that content recommended to them, based on algorithms and their viewing habits or what their friends are recommending, they actually can find something much quicker and actually discover content that they didn't even know really existed. Like we found on our platform that a lot of people were discovering The Serpent when it was on BBC iPlayer. And, whenever I talk to people, they never even heard of The Serpent. And then my friends that go to their go-to app, they're like, oh my gosh, like a year later, oh my God, I found the most amazing show, The Serpent. I go, yeah, I saw it months ago. No, it just came out on Netflix. But it was there before, and they missed that whole window of actually trying to discover some great content because they never got to that third or fourth icon on that platform. So I think that's one of the challenges.
Got it. On the other hand, interesting enough, kind of the thinking about different device types. So looking at a smartphone, it's totally fine. Everyone has plenty of apps, right? So why is that different on the big screen? And maybe Sylvain, you can talk from a, let's say, operator platform perspective.
Yes. I mean, typically, we come from mostly the large screen background, bringing together originally linear TV, then adding PVR, adding VOD, then adding OTT apps, and eventually moving into a multi-screen space where the service in fact shifts from being device-centric to being service-centric. And I guess probably the best example is almost what we're doing in France, where we're bringing together the service as part of one experience across the different types of content which are relevant across most of the segments. And I think we need to take a segment view at some point around what people do, because there's no people do generally. But it means essentially that the usage is associated with the way you discover the content. And on the mobile service, you actually discover the content the same way that you discover the content on your TV. And if you start to see similarities, familiarity, and relevance in a simple way, then there is tie-in. Then customers stay loyal to this. And we do that. If you look at our UI on an Apple TV, on an iOS, Android, or actually on our own box UI, it's the same. And that makes a big difference.
And I mean, on also looking at it, there's no one consumer. I think this is kind of.
Really?
I don't know. Maybe we consuming the same stuff. I don't know. Let's check later. But this is kind of a challenge when looking at it from a product development perspective. You need to cater various needs, also different entry points. Not talking about the different flavor of content. I mean, just imagine how the paths are different getting to a certain type of content. And maybe Martin, you can comment on that one, what you see from your experience, how those flows are, if you could see there are, let's say, 3-4 typically user groups, or is it completely free and random?
I think what we see, and I think we all know in the room, there's not one type of consumption out there, right? Sometimes you watch an entire movie, sometimes you're binge viewing, Sometimes you're swiping on Instagram or on YouTube, and I think it's a combination of all these aspects. And I think we have a lot of operator customers, and I think that they're on a journey figuring out how can we become the super aggregator role. And I think what their strength is, they had really a lot of long-form content, but they're still figuring out a way to also target the viewers that sometimes just want to watch the clips or the snacks. And basically that's what we see in the projects we do with our customers, figuring it out also with the customer journeys, is that how can you make sure you can utilize the same content that you already have and maybe cut it into smaller pieces, create highlights, because I think that's what Instagram has already shown us. That for a lot of people, it's just a way to consume content. That's for them is video, so we're trying to bridge those gaps where you maybe have longer content, but maybe you can cut it into pieces or skip the parts that you don't care about, because that's also Instagram. You just swipe and you're in the next clip, and in the TV experience is not yet the case. So I think that they're not really the archetypes, but basically that your viewer might, on a different time of day, might want something else. And figuring that out and being able to offer these experiences that fit in the context of that viewer, I think that's really important.
Maybe Spencer, from a broadcaster perspective, dealing with those variety of entry points, but also variety of somehow identical, but on the other hand, tiny little different, so which makes kind of all this content pipeline complex.
Yeah.
What are your views and on that one?
Oh, it's interesting. So our streaming service is somewhat unique. It's called Stack TV, and I'll come to your question in a moment. But Stack TV is unique. In Canada, we have the luxury of working with so many different partners. And so Stack TV, which we launched 2 years ago, is a house of linear channel brands. It has all of the live linear feeds with the full linear ad load, plus on-demand content with a much lower ad load. And so it's interesting in trying to communicate what the value of the service is to different users. A large portion of the people that use it are actually folks that have pay TV at home, which was somewhat counterintuitive to what we intended when we launched it. And for those folks, things like the linear channel brands, Food Network and History and W, which is one of our owned brands, have real resonance, and they mean something to them, and they know what that brand signifies in terms of the content and the content experience. And that's really brought people in. But for folks that don't have a pay TV subscription, our research basically said they don't know what these brands are, many young people. And so what's driving them in is titles. So things like Bel Air, which was an NBCU reboot, has done really, really well for us on acquisition, and those folks tend to spend more time with the VOD content. So you have sort of a single product that has a really different value prop to different users, and so all the way from our kind of acquisition marketing through to the way that we think about the experience and the content that we're surfacing, you have to sort of keep that end user in mind. And that's been one of the big aha moments, I think, operating the service. Like the live streams are still half of viewing on the platform, which I don't think anybody would have anticipated 5 years ago. So.
Okay, got it. So before digging into kind of UX details and recommendations, just a matter of what are the different roles in the game, right? So we heard about Paramount Plus earlier. Already interesting to see kind of Pluto becoming not only a focused streaming service, but a platform. So it feels like there are a lot of platforms out there, and like with the economic background, there's only place for a couple of platforms, like economy of scale and network effects, etc. And so we're also looking at it at the market from a, let's say, neutral perspective and evaluating actually who's going to be that platform and what's necessary. And there's certainly kind of clearly the big tech guys with their amazing reach, also cross-financing and opportunities. Access providers sitting on the pipe and gatekeeping that one, but also kind of challenger brands coming into the market saying, okay, this is our role, and we're solving it. And certainly you have I assume an opinion on that one. But what's your view also in a positioning beside kind of the Googles, the Apples, the Comcast, etc.?
Is that for me, that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think to not be biased, when you kind of like take a step back and you kind of look at other industries, like the music industry, where they had the major players at that time, whether it was Pandora or Apple Music, that had the reach, they had the deep pockets, And it was actually a challenger brand, Spotify, that came. And that was just really clever because they started to really work with the music companies at the moment where the industry realized there had to be a shift, and the industry wanted to still maintain that control, and Spotify was the right partner for them to do that. They were a fresh new brand. They didn't have this preconceived notion. They didn't have negative legacy issues. When you look back to Blockbuster, that had kind of cornered the whole market on video distribution for a number of years, they were very comfortable charging late fees. I'm sure we've all had late fees to the point where we never went back to get another DVD. And Netflix, there was a moment for them to come in and actually not have those legacy issues, not have that negative feeling of being overcharged over and over again. And I think that some of the brands that are trying to now, all of a sudden, they've realized that the consumer, they're moving. People are all complaining, oh, streaming, there's this issue, share prices are going down. It's not going anywhere. Streaming is the future of television, okay? Now, how the consumer gets there is one way, but there's a lot of legacy issues where consumers feel that they've been overpaying for content channels they've never been watching. It's kind of like paying for a whole album and not wanting to listen to the other 10 songs, but being forced to buy the album. People have been forced to buy channels they haven't been watching for a very long time. And whenever they're leaving that structure, they say, oh, we'll give it to you for free. So there's that issue, which opens the door for new brands that don't have these legacy issues, and to create a product that's very much focused on the consumer. Because at the end of the day, it's the consumer that decides how they want to consume content. It's not the big players that say, you're going to watch content this way now because I'm giving you a product. It's what the consumer wants. And the direct-to-consumer streaming plays, it's also because they want more control over their customer, to understand the data and to be able to really cater to them. And I think that there is a really big disconnect where people say it's just about content, because it's not just about content, it's about the brands. And a lot of consumers, they decide what they're going to watch by first saying, okay, I want to watch something great. They'll go to HBO because they know they're going to get on HBO. If I want to watch cartoons, I know I can go to Cartoon Network in America to watch it for my daughter. See, there's things that you can do. So I think the platform that gives the power to the brands and that helps to connect the content to the brands and puts it in a very seamless UI for the consumer, and the one that actually can create a pick and mix bundle, is the one that's going to win. I think it's actually a very level playing field right now. And we may not win, but there's a number of people in this game, and there's a lot of opportunity for more than one person. And I always say, when people start stressing out, but there's so many competitors, I say, well, you just need to get one person to put it on their TV, and once they have an aggregator that they're happy with, they're not going to get rid of it. So
totally agree. That's the role of the challenger coming into the market. And maybe Sylvain can comment on that one, looking at it from a...
I think that has not necessarily been mentioned. I think the difference between the TV and the music industry is that in the TV there's a very strong part to the local broadcasters, which play a big role in every single country. If I look at the experience and the data, because we are very much focusing on the data to provide the best experience and the best product in the end, 60% of the usage is still with the local broadcasters being live or catch up together. Yes, it was 80% 10 years ago, so people may extrapolate for that, but it's still a very strong, sense of the local content, and the rest is split between 15% would be some of the premium streaming services. It's not actually that much, in fact. 15% is actually YouTube on the big screen. You have to admit that actually I see taking an increasingly big role, and 10% and growing is actually the fast channels. So we talked a lot about, I'm sure today, about the fast channels. We are actually increasingly embedding. Our service includes 100 plus channels that are on top of your traditional broadcast content. And if you bring it together, you offer enough choice, but also I think at this time of a typical cost of living crisis that I think everyone is experiencing, bringing value to the user is really important. And I think fast interestingly play a part of that because it starts with F, which is free. So you've got free broadcaster content, fast, enhanced with obviously your premium services that you may want to, as much as possible, pick and mix. And I think that's one of the challenges offered to the user. And our role has always been to actually make sure that you provide a simple access to that choice and with the best possible value. And in the end, the platform that does that for a consumer, they will stay loyal. The average usage per day, within our base in the UK is 6.5 hours, which is an hour and a half over the UK average of Com. And we measure, satisfaction, engagement, and that's how we see whether it's going to work or not.
Cool. Now stepping a bit into kind of the discovery part and digging a little bit into that one, and I gave it a theme like demystify recommendation engines, because sometimes, even for me, it feels a bit like a black box. You don't entirely know what the thing is doing. And if it's going to the wrong direction or the right direction, and also looking at Netflix introducing like the top 10, which feels like, okay, this is not very sophisticated. I mean, therefore, I don't need any AI in order to do so. Eventually, my Excel spreadsheet could solve that. So maybe Martin, on that one, since you're kind of also in that, well, you're an AI company, so there must be some value in there. Just help us a bit, like demystifying what's going on there, how much sophistication is in there, and what's needed actually to fuel that engine.
I think that may be good to know. We don't do recommendations ourselves, but what we see is that recommendation relies really on having good data as input as well about the viewer, what they do, what they like, what they appreciate, but also about the content itself. And that's where we play a big role currently with our customers that have a lot of broadcast content, which is still consumed a lot, and also about the live content. That's often still a black box. The programs that are what we call non-scripted live, so you don't know in advance what will be in the programs. There's no program description. It's just generic, this is the news or this is the talk show with famous people. But it will not tell you whether it's Lewis Hamilton or it's about Ukraine or it's about Eurovision Song Contest. And this is the type of information we're currently adding and also partnering with many of the rec engines so that we can associate it if you watch a program, that if you watch, we can start detecting that you like Lewis Hamilton, and as of then start creating like a row for, yeah, you're a Lewis Hamilton fan, start using this. While all this currently is when it's a sports program, it's just, yeah, you watch the sports program, so you must like sports, but it does not really associate with what people like. So that's basically the step we bring in, trying to identify what's in the content and use that to, yeah, make the recommendations better. But indeed, like, recommendations have been out there already for many years, and I think 30 years, and I think everyone still complains about recommendation engines, and I cannot find the content I have, or I already seen many movies that is not in this platform. And I think, yeah, that's also a bit of the industry challenge still. Yeah, there's just so much content to choose from, and people, I think for consumers, you're in a luxurious position. There's so much to choose from. It's a big buffet. Yeah, we need to make sure that it's for them, it becomes manageable, and make sure they can find everything they want.
And Spencer, you have kind of the experience from two different angles, running kind of the own product, having that experience, but also supplying content to other platforms.
Yeah.
And eventually, you must have the data comparing kind of that against each other, what performs well on the platform, if a good recommendation engine is triggering some more consumption, which the idea. Mm-hmm. Do you see something, and what are the levers actually to improve?
Yeah, I mean, those are the two big lenses for sure. And so maybe I'll kind of take them piece by piece and then try to bring it together. You know, where we work with partners to distribute our content, you know, Pluto's a good example globally. Our kids studio distributes content with Pluto around the world. We're going to trust them, right? And they're going to have the platform and the investments, as you heard from Dan, to make the right decision for a consumer. And what that decision is on Pluto might be really different than what it is on our own platforms. So, you know, we definitely look at both, but it's hard to draw a direct line to say if this worked here, it will work for us. On our own platforms, you know, we've seen some really interesting stuff. Like, all of the recommended sections now are generated based on actual viewing behavior, and it actually took a bit of cultural change to get people comfortable with doing that within a broadcaster. But the results that we saw in terms of time spent and usage really spoke for themselves. You know, the other interesting thing that we've done around recommendations isn't so much on the content, but around advertising and promotion. So trying to figure out, you know, we're our own biggest advertiser across our own linear networks, and figuring out the right spot to promote another show, and, you know, how to drive more usage based on that very scarce promo time that we have was an area that we use tools similar to what I think Martin does around looking at very granular device level data. And for the first time, we could say this person saw a promo and they actually tuned into a show. And so there was, just back to your earlier comment, a bit of a black box initially with the marketing team, because we couldn't really explain how the algorithm was making the prediction. But I think one thing that was really helpful was that it affirmed things that we were always already doing and always already knew. Like the number of times a person saw a promo. There's a point of diminishing return, but we were able to see that and model it very specifically. So, I think recommendations, the way we think about it, is about content, and that crosses platforms, ours and partnered, but also about the advertising and how we can make that experience as relevant as the content.
Got it. And Rose, I mean, you're having this aggregator role, right? It's important that you get kind of the data from the various services in order to kind of promote it properly. And it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, right? For all the streamers, and we heard it before, how much data you want to share in order to get promoted. So what you're seeing is that do kind of streamers and the different services understand that it's important actually to help the aggregators to get promoted, or they still are being a bit reluctant in getting promoted, getting integrated into search, providing the data that are part of the unified search, and how will it develop?
Well, I think that there's a few things that are kind of going on out there. I think that there's people that have been pirators that have just been stealing data for a long time, and content, and aggregating that. And about 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge, when there wasn't a lot of streaming services, there was a big issue with piracy. And the consumer, at the end of the day, just wants to go somewhere and get something very easy. And so there's been pirators because they were not able to do these deals. So when Screen Hits decided to shift gears about 2.5 years ago, we went to our partners, and we went to everybody and asked, we want to really work with you, these are the benefits. And there wasn't an education process, because when we were starting to do it, it was very new. And people want to kind of control their data, which I completely understand, because you don't really want your content being promoted next to some other content that's at a completely different level, because then it affects your brand. So it's also brand association. And so we decided to have a curator aggregator to kind of address that issue. And I think that now the industry is very much aware, because the consumers are speaking out. There's been a lot of data to kind of challenge a lot of these opinions and viewpoints that have been coming out in the market for the past 2 years. The frustration for the consumer, there's two things that can happen. People can keep their data in their prized possession and use a lot of their own money to market and try to get subscribers. Or they can work with those they want to work with, where they can get access to that customer 360. I think that as long as the content is connected to the brand, which I think is very important, I think as long as the large streamers that have that position are forcing people to redirect to their platform, so they're getting that data, they're owning that customer, then I think that it makes perfect sense to work with these metadata providers. So, we've been very fortunate, and we share the data. So people are able to actually kind of sit there and see, okay, great, we have, at this moment, a person who's been a subscriber for 8 months, but now they're dropping. Why have they dropped? And then they have to try to figure out what that is. What aggregators can actually do, and like some of the data that we get, is we see which customers are adding certain streaming services. So they may come to Screen Hits and add 4. And then we see how much they're using across those 4. And then we see when they drop one. And so we can retarget to kind of bring that subscriber back. And that's very valuable data to help in minimizing churn and retention. And I think that the industry is starting to see that.
And just thinking about purely about, I mean, it's UX, but also thinking about UI, and maybe Sylvain can comment on that one. I mean, we used to have this EPG, which was straightforward, and people were fighting about positions in the EPG. Then
I love the EPG.
It's quite handy, that's true. But if you have 300 channels, then maybe it's not the right thing to do.
Shouldn't have 300 channels.
Yeah, maybe. But then thinking about now streaming service, you can think of a lot of now platforms are doing Rails, and it's just another way of also EPG somehow. And then there are some players who are trying to break it and truly aggregate and truly mix the things, which also brand safety recognize. Is it now from which provider is it actually? So what's your view also from a platform perspective?
If you want to truly play in the game of the super aggregator, and we position ourselves as, if you want, an alternative to the pay TV platform with obviously ideally better value and with more simplicity. And as I said before, we're very happy to leverage the fact that there's a lot of free or ad-funded content within that, because in the current climate, it's actually welcome. We've actually looked at different entry points. We support them because there are different segments, as we said before. In fact, the very first comment we had when we actually updated our UI 3 years ago was that we removed the term guide from the UI. So you could access the guide but by pressing guide on the remote control, but we removed the guide somewhere. And we got a lot of comment and feedback on that is, where is my guide? So there is a portion, some segments who are more traditional, they want to see the guide, and then you've got to be there. Of course, it's supported. Of course, you can actually go to the reverse EPG and see what you missed and so on. You can all do all of that. But we have to support the different ways of discovering content. So whether it's via the guide, traditional, via the presentation, if you want, via the rails, and we typically aggregate across different broadcasters and streaming services, via the universal search as well, which is very important. And it's truly universal search. So if you look for Top Gear, you will find it live on Dave or within Catch Up free on iPlayer or included in Amazon Prime. You will find those. And I would argue that increasingly, if you're on brands that are associated with more the shows than actually the brand that they're associated with, as well as voice control, which is also a way to actually access. And I think it's suited for different needs of different segments.
And Spencer, maybe from a perspective of a content provider, this is, I mean, what we are typically here, I mean, it's kind of a, it's a fine line actually providing and seeing it as even promotional efforts, providing metadata in a proper way to the
So I think that's what we're trying to keep in mind in all these conversations. The super aggregation feels like the answer to me, just intuitively, in a lot of the research that we've seen. In Canada, it is very fragmented. We have a lot of US streaming services that are now available in Canada. Some of that content is available on our linear channels. Some of it is available in our streaming service. So just from a purely content standpoint, one show could point to a couple different places. And so speaking as a consumer, I think super aggregation is awesome, and it should happen, and it should point people, and platforms like Amazon are making decisions to point people to what they deem to be the best experience on the platform. So if we have content on there with ads that a consumer subscribes to, and they also have it in an ad-free service, they might get pointed to another service. Now again, that's great from a consumer standpoint. What we're trying to figure out is, how do you build a sustainable business there, right? Because things like picking and choosing the very best of our content comes up against the rights that we have for that content. Even the content that we produce and commission in Canada has some rights attached to it. So I think we're trying to get to that place as quickly as we can, while still carving out a sustainable business for ourselves in Canada and honoring the rights that we have. So that's our challenge, right? That's what we got to figure out.
If I can weigh in, what we see often in the discussion, you need to aim for the win-win. So it should be, if it's that platform, make sure it's beneficial for both, and then you get also a bit out of the discussion, like, hey, I don't want you to cut in my content. And that's what we see, is that, for instance, we have a long program, and we said, no, but maybe people only would like to have the middle part, so they would watch less of your program. That's kind of paradoxical, because it's always about they should watch the entire show, while we are more about, it should be about engagement. What if they're more happier with your show if they're able to just watch the middle part and not the rest? It's kind of a new way to think about content, because that's not what you had in mind when you produced the content. No, it's like you want to have a certain story out there. And that's also the discussion we're trying to raise with broadcasters and content owners. Like, hey, maybe you should explore it at least, talk to your customers, and test this with your audience to see what happens, instead of always mandating it needs to be in the form it was produced in.
You good? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just from my perspective, you could also argue the other way around. Like, with all these things being mixed up together, I mean, this is there's missing consistency, and I think within this complex world, you just have this endless scrolling, being trained by by Instagram, etc. So there's no end. I mean, you could also think and it's what we're hearing, kind of a complaint with Netflix that you don't find the stuff anymore because they're shuffling around all the time. Therefore, going back, if the app is always on the same spot, and if maybe it's a broadcaster, maybe it's a streaming service, so there's some trust, because there's also a limitation of, like, you have a bucket of choices per day, right? And like in the evening, it's pretty tough because they're all gone, and you want something that you recall if you turn on the TV again.
Watching, you can never find it. You know, it's always pushed down. But you made a good point earlier that, you know, there's some of these services that they have their own services, so they're always pushing their content first, right? And then the other content gets lost, or people are selling positioning and they're selling marketing. And so you as the consumer are just getting thrown stuff where you're just like, why is this even here? Which is also some of the issues with finding the content that you want. So I do think that in this world of aggregation, there has to be a player that is not in it for having their own content or selling positioning on a TV set or having a motive. It needs to be someone that is non-biased, so they give every single partner the equal positioning, and the customer decides what they want to see, because it's true. I mean, I can never find Bridgerton on Netflix, and I've been watching it for the past like 5 days. Why is it never there? Why do I have to search for it? I don't know what's going on with that search engine. Anyway.
And how is that, like, everyone is, like, this, from my perspective, there are a lot of like recommendations engines, thoughts, and they're on various levels, and that doesn't feel right, actually. This is kind of a bit of a waste of effort. Like, on every level, everyone's is focusing on that one. I totally get, actually, why from a certain perspective you're doing it. But how will that be balanced or not? Or will there be players getting kicked out and saying, okay, we're purely a content provider and we leave it with our own D2C service, because it's just, we're stuck in the middle. We're kind of in a which position that doesn't make sense. Maybe still not.
I think there's one aspect we have not talked about much, which is the human element. So I think there's obviously, if you look across our UI, probably you could say 80% of what's there is managed by some smart, algorithm that does a lot of things, that learns from, which clicks have been, selected, some behaviors. We put customers in different buckets, then we associate all that kind of stuff. But in fact, we realized that although it's 80% is generated, in fact, half of the clicks of the choices made are actually on something that we have curated. So there's an element also of curation, which is also very close to the local market, understanding of the needs, and working closely also with the partners and making sure that we can promote things which are relevant to certain times. So I'm not sure, for example, that an algorithm would have actually picked up that there is something called the Platinum Jubilee next week, and therefore there's a lot of shows about the royal family that are being available here and there. That is part of the curation, and I think it's also an important part of how we bring things together. And I think the platform, in my view, that will win will actually combine the best of both worlds, the algorithm base and the curation part.
I do think there'll be a rise of the programming executive again, because I think that people kind of thought they were like part of the old traditional world, but they're very important because of that curation. And I agree. It's the programming executive and having that industry knowledge and having the understanding of what's good, because programming executives are not just sitting there thinking, oh, I really like the 80s. Let's watch Tom Cruise today. I mean, they were really focused on research and data and what was trending and making the recommendations for their audience. And I think that will be a huge shift in the streaming world when people stop depending so much on technology to make recommendations, but then they start to reintegrate the programming executive.
I think it's not either or, right? It's not black or white. There's certainly connecting the dots in a smart way, and it clearly needs to be supported by data. But the data alone won't solve it. I mean,
our head of content used to say that she spent 30 years developing her algorithm. If people asked how she picked a show in LA, and it's true.
It's so true.
It's true.
I mean, it's the heart. I mean, When we had like, what, 5 channels back in the 80s in America, it was like, before cable came out, it was just like, I mean, I was stuck to V and I Love Lucy, and somebody was sitting there and decided that that was going to be a hit show, and it was. So
It was simple, right? So there was no...
it was
it's true.
curated, curation.
I think it will be the combination indeed. We also think that AI will not solve everything. I think the misconception with recommendation engines right now, it's driven by business rules. And like of course, the players that have a certain power in the market, they want to make sure you watch their content and not content from other players. So that's the reason why you get certain recommendations. It's not always because it's in your best interest. It's also about that aspect. But don't forget, like also what Omnia said this morning, like Netflix is the biggest service, and they will be the biggest still. So they also do something that people really like, and also people are churning services, but they get back to services. So that's also the situation. It's not like it's completely horrible. I think a lot of people are happy with the content they have.
They have great content.
Yeah.
Bridgerton.
All right, so wrapping up, because I think the time is running out, just a last question. We haven't talked about commercial bundles, but this would be, I think, another big topic. Nevertheless, what I'm curious to understand and get your view, so we talked a lot about features, about this recommendation engine, and is that something a consumer understands clearly as a value? I think that's a tick, but also are they willing to pay extra on that one, just to add like spending, I don't know, €2-3, euros, etc., to get a better recommendation, maybe like as a differentiation factor, or doesn't that needs to be bundled in, and it's kind of they're paying for content?
I mean, I don't think that anybody would pay to have recommendation services because people don't believe in them. They don't feel that if the best ones can't provide it, then they would just never pay for it. But I think people will pay for a frictionless experience, and I think that people will pay to have their lives easier so they can get the most access out of all their streaming services. Because the reality is there's so many great streaming services with amazing content that never is getting surfaced. And people will subscribe. I mean, I was reading about this person that had subscribed to HBO Max, but then they never actually accessed it because it was never like the first icon on their TV. And so they ended up dropping HBO Max and losing all that amazing content because they felt they never had access to it. But the same person loves having an aggregation system where they can now actually just get to see all of the content that they have access to in one go, and controlling that. So that's what I think people will pay for.
I think it's very hard to sell the functionality, and we've been there before. We did try, in fact, and the good thing is that we learn from experience. I think it's extremely hard. I think it's going to be packaged with relevant content for the user in what we do as in simplicity, choice, and value as an experience. In our business, most of our distribution goes through broadband providers, so in fact it's even further. It's actually you get the best access with actually the relevant content you want together. So it's even another layer of bundling in our business. And because I think it's very hard to have the conversation about giving you this great functionality. Or in the end, I think they want the content at a good price on something simple to access.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I think we're good to go. Thanks for having us. Please join me with thanking the panel.